Hi, everybody. I'm Don Dixon, and I want to thank you for joining me once again for a continuation of our masterclass study on the right stuff. Over my entire career, traveling all over the country, I've met thousands of fishermen, and I've always been amazed at how many of those fishermen are equipped with the wrong gear. And that gear could be rods, reels, lines, lures, depth sounders, and our discussion today, our topic of today, boats and motors. I've seen so many fishermen that are just putting themselves in a jackpot. They're hindering their chances by having the wrong gear. So this entire discussion about the right stuff, it's not necessarily to bring up a brand name or a manufacturer. I have no interest in that. But I do have an interest in telling you what type of a rod you need, what type of lures you need, what type of a boat and motor. And that's what we're going to talk about today. You know, it wasn't too long ago. I think it was about 5 months ago. It could be 6 months. Time's flying since we started having fun again. But a few months ago, I was sitting at a friend of mine's shop. He has a Firestone store. Name is Mac. And I've been dealing with him for, 30 years, something like that. Now, I had to get some new tires on my wife's car. And while I was sitting in the waiting room, there were some magazines, and he's a sportsman, so there were some magazines. I won't mention the name of this magazine, but there was a magazine, a fishing magazine, on the coffee table. I picked it up, and I just opened it up. And it opened up, the first 2 pages were 2 advertisements. It shocked me. It was a boat manufacturer. Again, I won't mention the name. And on the left-hand page, on my left-hand page, there was a picture of this boat. And it was, in fact, a bass boat. And it had a 150-horse engine on it. And at the top of this advertisement was, in big letters, the price of that rig. The criminally low price of $59,995. Now, mind you, I'm still fishing, but I've been away from the game for a while. I've been away from the business for a while. And I almost had a heart attack when I saw that price of that rig. And then on the right page, on the right-hand page, it was the same maker, but this boat was, I think, a foot longer, foot or 2 foot longer, bass boat, and it had a 250 on it. And at the top of that page, the criminally low price of $69,995. I'm going to be honest with you. I was in the fishing business for over 35 years. I sat there in amazement. I was so shocked. I hadn't been paying any attention. I said, is that what's happened to our love of fishing? Is that what's happened to our favorite sport? 70 grand for a boat and motor to go fishing? And not only that, when I'm done today, I'm going to explain to you why that's just not crazy and out of bounds and harmful to our sport in so many different ways. I'm going to try to explain to you and how I feel about it. But most importantly, it's a hindrance to your fishing success. It's not a help. You would think if you're spending 70 grand for it, not only will it catch you a fish, it'll take you to them, it'll catch them for you, it'll clean them for you, and then you can sleep in it and drive it to work. $70,000. I paid half of that for my first house that I bought. Just crazy. And at the same time, it's something that's not right for you. It's not going to allow you to have total success. For all species of fish all year round. It's the worst thing you could be buying. And I called a few of my friends and they asked me if I hadn't been paying attention. I said, no, I hadn't been. They said, well, we've actually heard of some that are at $100,000. I said, for a boat and motor? Seriously. I thought that's what Tiger Woods paid for his yacht. That's how much I knew about it. But I'll tell you what, that upset me. Because I saw in so many different ways what was happening to this business that I love, to the game that I love, fishing. that I wanted to do something about it. I wanted to try to set it straight. And it's going to involve me telling the truth about boats and motors, which is what I'm going to do today. So I hope that you're not going to get mad at me. I hope I'm not going to offend anybody. But I'm going to try to say things the way they are. And then in the end, I'm going to let you decide what you're going to do when it comes to your boat and motor. But as you probably already know, you've probably seen, I'm an advocate of smaller boats. And you want to ask why, and I'm going to explain why. But first I want to share with you that Buck Perry, the first time I met him, I explained to you what kind of boat he was in. And the last time I went fishing with him, he's in the same kind of boat. You know, over his illustrious 70-year career, being recognized as the father of structure fishing, being recognized as the one single person who revolutionized all of modern day fishing. It was his discoveries and his findings and his curriculum. It was the only curriculum ever written on the subject of fishing that was full of the facts that revolutionized our sport. Now, this is a guy, as he was becoming more and more popular and more people were finding out about him and his discoveries. When he was the education editor of Fishing Facts magazine, he was reaching millions of people, and all of a sudden everybody got the idea. And Buck Perry became a pretty popular name out there, and rightfully so. But you know, because of his popularity and who he was and what he meant to the sport, to our sport, you should understand that every manufacturer of a boat and motor that existed back in those days when I first started with Buck, they called him all the time. They wanted to give him all of the different boats and motors that he could ever use because they wanted his endorsement. They wanted Buck to say, this is the best. I like this one the best, and so on and so forth. But yet none of these manufacturers were making the kind of equipment that Buck was fishing with. They weren't making what he wanted and what he knew was the best to control his depth and speed out there on the water. So every time someone would call, he'd turn them down flat. He wouldn't even talk to people. I always thought, you know, maybe there's some compromise in there somewhere. Maybe we get some newer equipment and some different stuff, but no, he never would. And you know, he was fishing out of the same type of rig in 2004 as he was back in 1970. It hadn't changed. Now you would think, a thinking person would probably put this together without me saying it. There must have been a reason for that. He could have had the biggest and the fanciest and the fastest and the prettiest boat, the most expensive boat there ever was, given to him for free. And he wouldn't take it because he knew it wouldn't allow him to do what he needed to do out there on that lake. He stayed with the same rig for a lifetime, and he wouldn't change. As I tried to pull him away from that stringent small boat, now I understand why a small boat, and I'm going to tell you, relatively small boat. I was fishing 300 days a year. I wanted to be comfortable. I wanted a casting platform. I wanted some of the things that were on the bigger boats, but I wanted most of all to be maneuverable. I didn't want it to be too heavy. I wanted it to be maneuverable so I could follow my brake lines, do my map and interpretation, do my proper trolling when it was called upon. I needed to have that relatively small rig, but I found out I could use a little more engine that Buck was used to using, because he always said 10 horse and 14 feet. That was his deal. 14-foot boat, 10 horse engine. And he stayed with that for years. But when he stopped fishing for a living, actually out there on the lake every day beating his brains in like I was, it wasn't all that important to him. But I finally got to a point where I talked to Buck. I said, look, I need to be a little bit more comfortable out there. I'm out there 300 days a year. I need a little more comfort. And I wouldn't mind having a casting platform. And there's some things about a V-hull that I didn't like, or a semi-V. If the wind would blow, it would take a front end and move it around where I didn't want it to move. And it interfered with my ability to follow brake lines, which was killing me in my fishing and in my map and interpretation. So back in 1978, I wanted a roomy, comfortable, stable boat, and I wasn't real thrilled. You know, back in those days, there were only two types of boats being built. There was the newest thing, you know, the bass boat was being built, and really what it was an Allison racing hull, and my good friend Jimmy Cronenwet, who ended up building a boat for me, he used to race Allison boats, and all of these new bass boats were nothing more than an Allison racing hull with a big engine on it, and they built a casting platform up front. They called it a bass boat. And that thing has evolved, as you know, to those two ads that I saw in that fishing magazine just a few months ago. See how it's gone from that beginning to 70 grand for a rig. Unbelievable. But at any rate, back when I won that muskie tournament, when my partner and I won the muskie tournament, when I won the walleye tournament, all the walleyes and all of the Lake Erie stuff that we just showed you over the last couple of weeks, we were using, back in those days, we were using a semi-V, my original boat, a Lumacraft semi-V with a 9.5 horse Evinrude. That was my original rig. And my partner, Tommy, he had I think it was a Starcraft, same idea, 14-foot, 10-horse engine. And we stayed with that. Listen, everybody laughed at us when we went to that muskie tournament after they heard me give my talk the night before the tournament. And then they saw us launching our boat. Well, we were a laughingstock. They thought, these guys don't even have a boat, for goodness sake. Look at that, 10-horse engine. Well, we caught 4 fish, and the 250 other guys caught no fish. So, you see, the fish didn't know that we were in a 14-foot boat with a 10-horse engine. But that boat and that motor allowed us to control a depth and speed that won that tournament. Same up in Canada when we fished that one little walleye tournament that I told you about. Depth and speed caught those fish. They didn't know I was in a small, actually I was in a 15-foot boat with a 25-horse engine in that tournament. But what happened was I told Buck, I need something different. I think we could build a boat. You know, just a boat for the guys who fish like we do. But I want it to be comfortable. I want it to be about 15 feet long. I want to have a casting platform. I want to be able to have that. That's good. I want to have live well. I want it to be light. I want it to be maneuverable. I want to be able to run it with somewhere between a 10 and a 40 horsepower. And he looked at me kind of strange, and I said, I'm going to get after that, Buck. I really am. I think the world is ready for a new kind of boat. And my thought was, at the time, there were bass boats, and then the other side of the fence were these semi-Vs like the Lunds and these aluminum boats that the most northern guys were using, the walleye guys. Those were the two type boats. One was thought to be a trolling boat, and the other one was thought to be a casting boat. Well, in order to be successful 100% of the time, we've got to cast and troll both. We need a boat that will allow us to do both things. And here's where the problem comes in, my friends. Here's where the real problem comes in. You cannot troll with a steering wheel. The number one thing I needed to have in a boat wasn't the casting platform, wasn't the lightness, wasn't the, good looking, wasn't the comfortable and all of that stuff. That wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was that it had tiller handle steering. Because fishing with a steering wheel, trolling with a steering wheel, is impossible. Can you drag some lures, put some rod holders in and drag some lures with a steering wheel? Yeah. But can you troll? No, you can't. It's impossible. When I first met Buck on that fateful day, when he took me out and caught me all those fish, we trolled every one of those fish up. We did not cast one fish. He proved to me the importance of trolling in a Florida-type lake, fishing one-sided bars, things which I've already talked to you about. But then, doing all the trolling in the summer schools and catching all the walleye, trolling and winning the muskie tournament. I can go on and on and on and on. He really concentrated on the trolling aspect of successful fishing because he told me probably in the first 3 months I was with him, he must have said it 1,000 times. Anybody can make a cast. He said, you can teach a 5-year-old how to cast in 5 minutes. And he said, the funny thing about it is, you can make the same exact cast from a pontoon boat that you can from a bass boat. You can make a cast from fishing out of a kayak. But you can't troll with a pontoon boat. You can't troll with a bass boat. You can't troll with a kayak. That'd be pretty hard to do. hold the rod in your teeth. I can see that. That probably wouldn't work. At any rate, you're getting my point. I can make a cast from this dock, but I can't troll with it. So Buck concentrated on this aspect of successful fishing, trolling, following break lines, not only for fishing and catching fish, but in our mapping and interpretation, which Buck went on to say is the most important thing in fishing, period, end of story. Being able to get a detailed map of a bottom feature of a structure so that you can fish it properly. The only way you can discover the size and shape of that structure, the detailed size and shape of that structure, is by following the break lines that form the structure. And you have to follow it exact. You can't just sort of head that direction somehow. You got to follow it in order to get those answers. When Buck talks about, in the end, with my map and interpretation, I want to be able to point to a spot and say, there's the contact point. Here's where the fish first make contact coming out of their deep water sanctuary and hitting this structure. They make contact right there. And he'd draw his finger in the water and say, I mean right there. Now, you know how he got to that spot? And he was always right, by the way, always right. He got to that spot because of his ability to follow a break line precisely and then get a precise, detailed interpretation of the map he just drew. And he could say, there's the fish, or there's the fish. And he was always right. And he could only do that by having that ability to follow a break line precisely. You cannot do it with a steering wheel. You can't troll deep break lines effectively like we just did in Lake Erie, or the week before we just did up in Winnipeg for the walleyes. You can't follow those spots precisely and put your lure right on the spot unless you have a maneuverable boat. And that means one with tiller steering. Let me put it to you this way. Once I decided I wanted, and you all have seen my boat, once I decided I would like to have a combination boat. I wanted to pull Buck into the 21st century, sort of, when it comes to equipment. But he said it's got to be small. It's got to be maneuverable. It's got to be all those things. We wouldn't sacrifice that for anything. And I said, well, I'm with you on that. But we could have a casting platform. We could have a stable boat. And we kind of copied off of the little 13-foot Boston Whaler. That was the boat that was so stable and was known as a real stable boat. And it sort of fit the idea of what I wanted in a boat. So I had my good friend who used to race the boats. He also owned a big marina, a Johnson dealer, back in the day. He built this big, just on a whim, he built at the time, $250,000 building and started making a new boat for me. And we went through about 9 or 10 molds before we hit on exactly what we needed. And it was a boat that was 15 foot long, and it could take up to a 40-horse engine, and it had a live well. It had, in fact, I have a picture of the very first boat. Now, the very first boat, since it was new for me and new for Buck, after we got done with all the testing and popped out this one that I thought was going to work fine. I showed it to Buck, and I kept it with a 10-horse engine. And there's a picture of my oldest son, 40 years ago, sitting in the very first custom boat that we made. Now, from that first boat moving on, we kept changing a little bit, and I was able to upgrade a little bit and be able to use a little bit heavier engines, a little more torquey engines, without giving up any control. And I always made sure of that. I prided myself in being able to be really precise running those brake lines for multiple reasons. And if it wouldn't allow me to do that, I wouldn't have went that direction. But we built a 15-footer, which ran with those good old 2-cycle 40s, run forever. And then we built a 17-foot that I like to use in the bigger waters, and I had a 60-horse on that one. And here's a picture of one. We got a few pictures of my boat. The first one, and this was the last one that was built, was a 17-footer with a 60. But I could do the same thing with both of those boats. So I was sort of, in the 21st century, I looked like it was a nice-looking rig. It was pretty and all of that. But most importantly, it would do what I needed to do without sacrificing what Buck made sure that we never would sacrifice. And that's the ability to control all our depths and all of our speeds. And that meant the tiller handle, was critical. Even when we got up to the bigger boat, got to have tiller handle. Steering wheels just don't allow you to do the job. So here's what I mean with a tiller handle. Here's what I want a boat to do. And I don't care, in my boat, I think we sold about 7,000 of them over the years. And when I retired, it was about 3 years later, my boat builder retired and they're no longer built. So I'm not selling you anything. I'm just telling you a type of boat I like to have. And one of the things, and the most important thing, when you go through comfort, stability, safety, casting platform, all of those deals, the most important thing that I need my boat to do is the ability to allow me to follow those brake lines. Now, when I have a tiller handle here, here's what I want my boat to do. This is what I suggest your boat should do. If I push that handle 2 inches that way, if I push that handle from here to there, 2 inches, 3 inches, I expect the front of my boat to just jump, snap, boom. Now back in the old days, you could get a 10-horse engine with a light aluminum boat to do the same thing. Push the engine, boom, and it snapped. Well, since we had a little heavier boat with the glass, because I wanted a fiberglass boat, period. Less noisy, it's just nicer. But it was a little bit heavier, so with a little torqueier engines, like with my 40 on my 15-foot, when I moved that tiller that far, front end of that boat would just jump. And that was something that we designed into the boat. We had a tri-hull configuration, but a true tri-hull won't allow you that kind of control in your trolling. So we had to modify a section of that front end to allow that nose to react to whatever I was doing back here. So it would react instantly with no slack like a steering wheel. You know, you start turning and about a half hour later the boat starts to turn. You just can't do it with a steering wheel. You need a tiller handle. So I'm not selling you my boat because it doesn't exist anymore, but I'm telling you, if you are looking for the right boat to fish all year long, all species of fish, which should include not only casting but trolling, it should be light and maneuverable. It should have tiller handle steering. And then from then on, you can pick your own poison as to whether you need a live well, whether you want to have a casting deck and all of those things, because there's a bunch of different boats being made. But if you're using a big boat and you're not fishing tournaments, but you're using a big, thought to be professional boat today, the big 2,000-pound bass boat with a 250 horsepower, more than my last 3 cars had, to go fishing, catch bass. Ridiculous. And it doesn't work. It's not only doesn't it help you, it hurts you. It keeps you from doing what you need to do out there. Controlling depth and speed from 0 to 60 feet, both trolling and casting. Can't do it unless you have tiller handle. So I'm suggesting that if you have a steering wheel and you really want to catch a lot of fish, you really want to get good, you got to get rid of that. You got to get rid of the steering wheel. If your tools don't allow you to do the job, then they need to be replaced. When I was a fishing consultant to the state of Illinois, part of the program that we had got me in touch with some people from OMC. And we developed a real friendship, and I suggested a few things back to some of their people about how much oil to not be using when you're doing a lot of trolling, and they tested some engines. So we had a connection. And a few years I got calls from OMC, and they like to come down here to Florida when they're making their new, for the catalogs for the marine sales and that. They would come down to Florida. They like to go over on the St. Johns River, had all the lily pads and a bunch of turns and run some boats in there. And I've always been, I think I shared this with you, I've always been a speed freak and racing guy, just not when it comes to my fishing. But they hired me on a few occasions and didn't ask me anything in return. They just paid me a heck of a nice wage to show up and meet them at the St. Johns River and drive some of their boats, and they would follow with a chase boat and shoot pictures. And then those pictures would end up in the catalogs. So this one year they had me in I forget the name of the rig. I don't even remember now, but it was a bass boat. And it had a 150 on it. Back in those days, the bass boats and the 150s were synonymous. That's what the tournament guys were using. They had me running up there, and when they said, when you come to a turn, don't tuck that engine under. Just keep it trimmed out, because they wanted to see that old big rooster tail coming up out of the back end shooting pictures, you know. So they basically had me racing that boat up and down the river, and they would follow with a chase boat. And I had a lot of fun actually doing it. And this one particular day, we had a model from Orlando. It was a male model. I'll never forget. Showed up in a Porsche Turbo. Got out of that thing. You could tell he spent 7 days a week in the gym. Boy, he looking good. He got in that side seat with me, and I'm racing up that, going, you know, around the bends and throwing the rooster tails and all that. We got about halfway through with the first run, and he said, "Take me back to the dock." He said, "I'm not doing this." He said, "They're paying me $400 a day, and it's not worth it. I am not going to do it." I never forget that. It was just a cute story. I thought I'd share it with you. But I took him back to the dock, and he didn't want to have any parts of looking good for the cameras. So we continued with our shoot. But I had a lot of fun doing that. But at the same time, I was thinking to myself, how in the world would a guy ever begin to troll or map and interpret a structure out of a bass boat with a steering wheel? It'd be impossible. And Buck was right. If he wasn't right, he would have been using one of those rigs years ago. But he proved it to me time after time after time after time. Small maneuverable boat, tiller handle, and we're going to arrive at the fish real quick. Now, I should mention, when I do close, we should mention trolling motors, what they call trolling motors. They're not really trolling motors, of course. You don't troll with them. It's a positioning motor. But do I have one? Yes, I do. And many times, off early season, if you're fishing, and you know I don't like fishing so much during the spawn, but early season, if I happen to be in a situation where I'm moving along a bank, I'll use my trolling motor, my quote trolling motor. But a lot of times in the late fall, I might be fishing up north. When I fish at natural lakes, we have a weed line. I might be fishing a mid-lake hump that has a weed line out to about 10 feet, and I want to check the top of the hump. So I'll be throwing some spinner baits. I'll use my trolling motor and sort of follow that brake line, the weed line brake line, around the structure, throwing up into the weeds, checking the shallows. So there are times when I use the trolling motor. But bulk of the season, most of the time, I'm not using it. I'm trolling to locate the fish. Once the fish are located, and I have a school of fish pinpointed, I anchor the boat and go to the cast. That's 95, 98% of the time. So do I have a little trolling motor, positioning motor? Yes, I have one. But do I use it much in the summer? Nah, not so much, but I have one. That pretty much, I think, covers boats and motors. You probably know at this point where I stand. The big boats and the big motors are should be left for the guys who are tied down to the rules and regulations of fishing tournaments. If you're part of the 60 million, I should have mentioned this, there's 60 million fishermen went fishing last year. 3 to 4 million fish some type of a tournament. I'm really talking to the other 56 million. Now, if you're a tournament fisherman, you can become more knowledgeable, because knowledge is the key to success, but you are handicapped. But so is everybody else. If you're fishing those tournaments, you all have the same handicap. Doesn't mean you can't be better than them by being better than them here. But for the other 56 million that are like me, you want to take your kids fishing. You want to take your grandkids fishing. You want to create that bond, that family bond that comes with our sport, that I grew up with and so many of my friends grew up with. We went as a family. We went fishing. And we experienced that time on the lake or on the river. Beautiful. And I want to see that come back. So for those of you who are not fishing tournaments, you're not encumbered by someone else's silly man-made rule. And you can apply both trolling and casting to your fishing. I want you to think in terms of your equipment when you do it. Till the next time, I want to thank you again for being with me today. Hope I didn't offend anybody. I didn't mean to. Just telling it the way it is. Buck says. By the way, Buck says, not Dawes. Buck says. And Buck is always right. Always. 100%. So be sure to like us on Facebook if you would. And subscribe to our channel if you haven't already done it. We appreciate you. See you the next time.